Hello, and welcome inside my chewy head. What kind of person gets locked up in a mental hospital? Someone violent, unpredictable, dangerous? What does it take to end up on an acute psychiatric ward? And if you did, would you ever tell anyone about it? This podcast is about dispelling myths, fear, and stigma surrounding mental health from my own personal experience as a patient. Right, episode 1. This comes with a small disclaimer. I will be talking about things which are very, very personal to me and also quite triggering if you have mental health issues, such as suicide, self-harm, feelings of general despair. So if you're in a really bad headspace, this might not be for you. And equally, if you're a child, again, maybe not appropriate. Right, let's just jump on in, shall we? Straight in there, inside my chewy head. Bear in mind, it is chewy, and so at times things fluctuate and change and are mixed up, and that's all part of me and my ongoing struggle with mental health. But our story begins on the 21st of August, 2019. So as I'm recording this now, it's nearly a whole year ago, which in itself absolutely terrifies me that this has been going on for that long. But anyway, that's where our story begins. I received a phone call in the afternoon. I'm an English teacher, and anyone who is also an English teacher will know that at that time of the year, you receive your GCSE cohort's results. And so I received the results of my year 11s, and I had been expecting, I'll be honest, I'd been expecting greatness from them because I had put in the hours. And when I say put in the hours, I don't mean, show up on time for work or a few hours early, once in a while, or pull an all-nighter every now. No, 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 no. I was showing up to work about the same time the cleaners show. In fact, every single day would beat the cleaners to work. There were quite a few times where the doors were actually locked and I had to wait until someone would let me in the building because nobody else was there. And again, leaving late, very late, to the point where my husband would be having a go at me, telling me, where's your personal life? Where's your family life? Where's your priorities, Ellie? And of course, I didn't really have any at the time. My priorities were based around fear and fear that I wasn't good enough and wasn't doing enough and wasn't the best teacher I could possibly be. And anyone who is a teacher who might be listening, you'll know that there is literally never a moment in your whole day where you couldn't be doing something towards your teaching job. So essentially I had this backstory of a very, very obsessive work ethic, I think is the best way to put it. And it's August the 21st and it's the afternoon and I receive a phone call from a member of the senior leadership team who's in school on the day because they get like a little preview of the results before the whole staff body formally or officially find out the next day. And she was giving me the results of my kids over the phone. And I was literally writing down every single name, writing down what they got. And I started realizing pretty early on through the list that, these kids were not getting what I thought they were getting. So in my head, in my fantasy, aspirational, I don't even know what brain, I was thinking, right, 9s, 8s, 7s, some 6s, maybe there'll be one or two who don't hit the mark. In fact, if I was being 100% honest with myself, I knew that there were at least 3 or 4 kids in that group who probably couldn't get the mark, and I'd said that earlier on. But apart from them, I really felt that there could be no other reason why these children wouldn't get what they should have got. But as I say, she's given me this list of the results, and in my head I'm thinking, what? Would you really? Is there a mistake? Is there an error here? Because these can't be my results. I don't understand why this child would have got this grade. I had kids who I presumed would be getting 6s, 7s maybe, and they were getting 4s. And I just couldn't tell you why that was. And I'll be honest with you, at that moment, my brain broke. It broke because it could not compute. I was like a machine that someone had put a strange code into, and the machine just couldn't register what was going on. And as a result of that, I stopped being able to function very, very rapidly after that. So I ended the phone call. I continued to look at the results. I started crying. My husband was there. And then very shortly after that, my friend came over because she was coming over, for the evening or whatever. And I can just remember being sat on the sofa and her talking to me. And, as you would do if something happens to your friend, you discuss it with them, but then you move on and talk about them and their lives. And I just could not register a single word that was coming out of her mouth because I was so busy in my own head thinking about these results, thinking about who had got what and why they had got what they got, and how could they possibly have got what they got, and what did that say about me as a teacher. Yeah, and it just consumed me. It was like a fire that burned and burned and burned and burned. I didn't sleep all of that night. I was dreading the next day, thinking about the fact that I was going to have to go in and face these kids who I'd let down. It was all my fault, how I hadn't done as well as other certain members of the department, and how, particularly one member of the department who there was a real issue between us, which I won't go into now, but you could have a whole podcast series on that, me. But, she had performed what I perceived to be better than me, and I couldn't understand that. And it broke me. I remember lying there looking at jobs. I was looking at jobs. I was thinking, oh, well, I can't teach anymore. I'm done. I'm done teaching. Draw a line under that one. What am I going to do with my life now? Shall I work for this charity? Do I have the time to retrain for a different job? It was mad. I just cried. I didn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. Went to work the next day to deliver the results to the children. It was like an out of body experience. People came up to me. I didn't really, again, register anything they were saying. I was interested in what was happening inside my head. And that was the only thing I could talk about. And that was my results and how bad they were, and understanding how they could be that bad, which I just could not comprehend. And then after that, I went home and cried some more. And my husband, who, bless his heart, up until that point had been a bit like, oh, okay, Ellie's like this, she's dramatic sometimes. And, she's an English teacher, a classic English teacher, very emotional and all of the things that we associate with English teachers. But he just turned to me and he said, Ellie, are you having a breakdown? Like, are you having a nervous breakdown? And at that point, I said, "Yeah, I think I actually might be." And it was like a weird moment, and I think about this moment a lot now because I think, God, if he hadn't asked me that, would I have been able to just suck it all back in and carry on and go to work? But that isn't what happened. And what happened was that I then went into like a catatonic state, I would say. I was mentally, I wasn't there. I don't know where I was. I have very very shaky memories of the next, I'd say, 24 hours or so. I was in bed. I was crying. I was saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I was saying that over and over and over again. I think my husband was completely flabbergasted and scared, as you would be. And so he rang his mum because that's just what he did. And she said, could she speak to me? So I was on the phone to her. She said Ellie needs to go to the doctors. So that we got a doctor's appointment. He took me to the doctors. I think that was the same day. The doctor immediately said I couldn't go to work the next day. I needed to take a bit of time out. He said I was depressed. And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think so, because my understanding of depression up until that point had been that it happened to, like, sad. Oh, look, I'll be totally honest with you. And I know that this is completely disgraceful to have this perception of depression. But before I became depressed myself or realized that that's what was going on with me, that's what I thought. And I'm sure that I'm not alone. And I'm sure that there are lots of other people right now, maybe even listening to this, who have like a misconception of depression, that it's just something that happens to like sad, fat loser people who can't get it together or ruminate and cry. And to be honest, depressed people do ruminate and they do cry. And, in my case, I certainly could not get it together. But it wasn't for will of trying. So yeah, so the doctor said to me, you're clearly depressed. I was shocked by that, dismissed that immediately. No, I'm not depressed. We went home and I informed my husband was in contact with my work because I couldn't deal with them at all. Because essentially the next few days were inset days and I was supposed to be delivering one of the mornings of the inset. So they were kind of dependent on me. And I was determined I was going to go to this morning. Bear in mind that along
this period of time, or somewhere in this period of time, I then started getting panic attacks. Never had a panic attack before in my life. Couldn't really have told you what a panic attack was properly. Again, I just thought it was something that people did when they were a bit sad or emotional before I actually had one. And I was having them just constantly, constant panic attacks, you know, to the point where my stomach muscles hurt from the hyperventilation or whatever. So anyway, I was determined I was going to go to work. I was going to go to work. I was going to go to work. Got up that morning, determined to get in, go to work. And my husband was like, look, you cannot go to work, because if you go to work and break down and have a panic attack, you're going to feel even worse than you already do. Like, you need to just look after yourself. But I was in complete denial that I even had a problem. But he was right, because I then essentially got dressed for work, got my shoes on, and my shoes were a really big thing at that time. Like, I found it so hard to put shoes on. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I did. I found it hard to put my shoes on. It would take me half an hour to an hour just sitting there trying to put my shoes on. And at that point, I just kind of gave in and realized that there wasn't no way I could get to work. I couldn't do it. Um, and to me, that felt like a massive failure, on top of the failure which I'd already just experienced of these results, which I felt were appalling results. And that was kind of the start of my breakdown. And I can remember just feeling absolutely terrified and absolutely overwhelmed by this whole new experience of my body being in control and my mind having to take a back seat almost, because I was not in control of when I had a panic attack, or how long it took me to do something, or even making a plan for that day. I couldn't do it. I could not do it at all. And it was terrifying. And I think partly that probably prompted further panic attacks. So it was a vicious cycle, a very, very negative cycle of failure, and just feeling that everything was my failure. And of course, the irony of that is that essentially my real failure there was a lack of acceptance, because I couldn't accept what was happening. Anyway, time went on, life continued around me, which I found very, very distressing, because for me, how could anything be the same, and yet things were for everybody else? Somebody else probably took my inset. I don't know. I wasn't there. My husband had to go to work, and it was a really, really difficult time, because I felt like I was stuck in one period of time and one moment really of distress that I couldn't break out of. I couldn't eat. I didn't sleep. I struggled to just negotiate the very basics of life. My mum would come up and support me. My dad came up. My best friend would come up. Basically, I was on 24-hour watch, really. And I was involved with a number of outpatient services who, quite frankly, none of which really wanted me. They kind of told me I didn't fit their criteria, and perhaps I didn't. I don't know. I do think that depending on where you live, the opportunities and the resources that are available to you in terms of kind of mental health support really vary. And unfortunately, where I live, they weren't great. But as I say, I was stuck. And so I don't know that one service was really going to help me much more than anything else could at that moment in time. I just felt like I was a machine that was broken and that had no future. I couldn't possibly see myself ever teaching again. I couldn't see myself having another job. I couldn't see myself doing anything. I just, for me, looking into the future was blank. There was nothing there, and all I could do right now was cause people around me pain. I strongly felt that I was letting everybody down, and people would be better without me. I was 100% certain, and that kind of grew and grew and grew in my head, and got louder and louder and more sure as time went on. And about 3 or 4 weeks of living like that, I really started thinking seriously about taking my own life. I would wake up in the morning and just think, how the hell am I going to get through today? How am I going to do it? How? I don't know how. And I kind of would sit in my garden, and I would stare at the washing line that was hanging, because it was kind of early autumn, late summer, and so there was a washing line. And I would think I could hang myself from that, and that would hold my weight. And that progressed to me trying it out, in a sense, not, properly, because otherwise I wouldn't be here, but, really experimenting with it, seeing would it test, because it was, I don't want to go into the details of the actual mechanisms and, but essentially I was playing with the idea of suicide. And I was openly discussing it with my husband and saying, look, there really is no real reason for me to be here. Like I find life an agony, and I don't want to live it anymore. Um, and from his perspective, he said at times it was so kind of cogent the way that I was speaking that it was difficult almost to argue with me. And I remember one time, I think that this might have been a couple of days before I was then admitted to hospital, and I did try and kill myself. We were in the car and we were driving down the high street, and a new Vietnamese place had opened up, and they were doing Vietnamese coffee, which I had tried previously on a holiday. And I said, "Oh, there's a Vietnamese place. Like we should go and get a coffee sometime." And my husband just broke down in tears, and he was crying, and I was really confused. Like, what are you crying about? And he was like, you literally were just telling me that you were going to kill yourself, and then in the next breath you're telling me that you want to try this place for a coffee. Like, how does that work? And I imagine that must have been really confusing for him, and I didn't have an answer to that really, because in my head, that like that's why my podcast is named what it is. My head was being chewed at, it was being gnawed at all the time, and eventually I lost it. It's not really a battle. People talk about depression being a battle, but I just lost myself. There was nothing there. It was almost like a disappearing, I would say, and this sense of needing to be dead just took over, which essentially meant that one night, it was a Saturday evening, and we'd got a takeaway. I wasn't really eating anything at that time, but I'd said, "Oh, let's get a takeaway." And I remember we got the pizza, and then I think I ate like 3 or 4 bits, like bites, and then I was like, "Oh, I'm done," because I didn't get any pleasure from it, so I didn't see the point in eating it. And I remember just sitting there watching TV and just thinking, God, if I just didn't exist anymore, then everything would stop. All of this shit in my head would stop, and people around me would be better off. And I was determined then that I would kill myself. And so my husband had to let the dog out. So I went upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and I attempted to slit my wrists with a razor. My husband obviously had been very concerned about me leading up to this. He broke down the door, and physically had to restrain me. I had already cut into my own wrists, um, and it's a bit blurry, if I'm honest, in terms of exactly what happened. But I know that he called an ambulance, because the crisis team, which were one of the services that I was involved with, had basically been building a case, I think, to have me admitted to hospital or something. I don't really know, but essentially, I didn't want to go to hospital. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I thought it was an overreaction. And to be honest, I was afraid. I was really afraid. I was just so afraid. I just found the prospect of living just seemed impossible. And, you know, how could there be a different way of living? I couldn't see that. So I just thought hospital would be a complete waste of time and taxpayer money and all of these strange thoughts. My husband was, as you would be, shocked, distressed, called his parents who lived not too far away, and they came over. And eventually, they, I was put in an ambulance and I was taken to hospital, to an A&E department. And I just remember feeling completely like how I imagine an animal would feel if they were trapped in some sort of net or something. Like I just felt completely panicked, just full of panic and just fear and kind of anticipation, like what's going to happen now. Like I just didn't know. I didn't want to go to hospital in terms of, going to a psychiatric unit, because I had probably what the majority of the public have in terms of an opinion about psychiatric units, that they're for mad people. I don't really know what I really meant by mad people, but I certainly didn't think. I had this kind of arrogance of thinking like, oh, that's not for me, not someone like me. That that might be okay for somebody who talks to themselves, or I don't know, has an eating disorder or whatever, but that's not for me. And I was in that A&E department, and bless them, my husband and his parents were in that A&E department for, must have been the majority of the night. At which point it got to, I think it was about 4 a.m, when this nurse came in and she said, right, either you go to hospital and you agree, or we will section you. And we have a doctor ready, because they were basically thinking that I would refuse. And my husband was like, Ellie, please do this. Make sure that you go voluntarily, because it will be better for you. And I think I just gave in then, and I just said, okay. And I guess maybe a very small part of me was hopeful, thought maybe something in this hospital will help me. I don't know what that could be. I can't imagine it, but maybe. And then I took another ambulance to this other hospital. And I arrived on that ward at about 5 a.m. So it was Sunday, it was 5 a.m. And I was probably the most scared I've ever been. It was terrifying. And yeah, I wish I could say that experience was the start of a brand new, exciting chapter in my life, where I just found a new lease of life. And I wish I could say that, but it's actually a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced and difficult and challenging to this day, than that. And I think sometimes we think life is like almost like a film or a book, or we tell stories, don't we? And they always have a beginning and they have an end. And maybe if that was, I mean, I know this sounds really egocentric, but if my life was a movie, that would be the end, wouldn't it? That would be like that. Oh, and then she goes into hospital and she comes. But that is not real life, and life doesn't have a beginning and an end. I mean, it does in terms of life and death, sure, but in terms of the journey that you go on, there aren't like chapters that it's a continuity. It just carries on. And sometimes you can't even see, your own character development, if we're going to use the story analogy. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there for this episode. So I've just arrived in my first hospital. I'm terrified. It's 5 a.m, and I'll pick it up next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to stick around, I'd love to carry on the conversation with you. You can follow me on Twitter at HeadChewy, or follow on Instagram at ChewyHeadPodcast, or even drop me an email with suggestions or reviews or questions that you might have that I could cover in later episodes of the podcast. It's chewyheadpodcast@gmail.com. Every Tuesday, I will be bringing you instalments from my Chewy Head. Next time, I'll be picking up with my first day and night on the psych ward. See you then.